folks, I'm Matt, and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. The consequences of the government's disclosure of UAPs, otherwise known as UFOs, are significant, as Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and his Republican counterpart, Mike Rounds, have introduced the 2025 UAP Disclosure Act. Co-sponsored by Senators Gillibrand and Heinrich, this legislation, literally over 60 pages long regarding UAPs, UFOs, which is just insane if you think about it, would force the government to come clean with the American people about the existence of UAP and, well, really what they've been covering up. UAP disclosure is inevitable. Mark my words on that. And will have far-reaching consequences for the United States and, of course, the rest of the world. Now, whether these consequences are catastrophic depends entirely on the government's proactive action in passing the UAP Disclosure Act and how our financial leaders prepare world financial markets for this inevitability and the associated consequences. Continuing to bury our collective heads in the sand is no longer an option. It doesn't matter if it's our viewers at home, people in our government, or people on Wall Street. So, the question is, how will UAP disclosure affect your investments, including your 401k and other retirement accounts? Today, one of the world's leading institutional investment managers will discuss this issue and what happens with controlled disclosure versus catastrophic disclosure. And of course, none of us want catastrophic. But first, please hit the subscribe and thumbs up buttons on YouTube. Leave a comment and let us know what you think about this episode. You can also find us on X at Good Trouble Show and everywhere else at The Good Trouble Show. You can also find us wherever you enjoy your podcasts. Search for The Good Trouble Show with Matt Ford. And as always, we need your help keeping the lights on. You can become a Patreon member of The Good Trouble Show simply by going to www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show. And really, for the price of a coffee, you can support our work here, and we certainly would appreciate it. Okay, so now with all of our little shameless plug out of the way, we have a new show to announce. This Tuesday, August 20th at 5 p.m. Pacific, we are hosting a Good Trouble Show book party in celebration of the release of Lue Elizondo's book, Imminent. This is Lue's first book, of course, which discusses his career and is loaded with revelations regarding UAP. Also, Ryan Robbins will be joining us to discuss Lue's book. Now, as many of you know, Ryan has been posting videos counting down to the imminent book release on his @Disclosure World account on X, and we're super excited about having him on. So we hope you're going to join us. And join us in the YouTube chat. And of course, hopefully everybody that's watching will have their copy of Lue's book. And we want you to share your thoughts on the book and maybe what your favorite revelations are. So again, that is this Tuesday, August 20th at 5 p.m. Pacific. Be there or be square. It's going to be a good time. And we will be posting a link actually to that show on our Twitter/X account. I can't get over not calling it Twitter later today. So stay tuned. That's where we'll post the link to the show. So anyway, it should be a really good time. We may have some other guests joining us. We'll see. All right. With that out of the way, today's guest has overseen multi-billion-dollar investment portfolios for top-tier 500 companies. He is the principal for Pacific Gas and Electric, managing PG&E's $30 billion investment program. Please welcome Erik Zidek. Erik, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. So, firstly, I'm glad you're joining us. I think, as probably everyone knows, prior to my departure for Las Vegas to do my real daytime job, we were going to pre-tape an interview with you, and my Windows PC took a giant crap. So we were very, very fortunate in that our Patreon subscribers chipped in a considerable amount of money to replace the entire hardware PC. So yeah, so we're back on the air, but appreciate you being understanding and rescheduling with us. So before we dig into all of this, I want to state, so point out to our viewers that you are not representing PG&E. Your appearance here is not part of your job at Pacific Gas and Electric. Your opinions or speculations or opinions you might have, they're all your personal views and do not represent PG&E's views or positions in any way, shape, or form. You're solely here as a finance professional, and we're glad you're here. So there you go. There's got that disclaimer out of the way. So before we dig into everything and kind of find out a little bit more about yourself, are you excited about Lue Elizondo's book?
Oh, absolutely. It's a few days out, and pre-ordered it a while ago, and certainly look forward to starting to read that.
Yeah, me too. I think I went and looked on my Amazon account yesterday to see when the book was going to deliver, and I looked and I think I ordered it like, I don't know, 3-4 months ago. As soon as it was announced, I ordered the thing, and unfortunately, Amazon hasn't said exactly when it's going to be here, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed it will be here. Be here on what is it? Tuesday, right? Is it Tuesday? Is that Tuesday the 20th? I think. Anyway. Yeah, it's gonna be great. I know it was a long time in the making. So Erik, tell us a bit about your background, and just for a lot of people here, I'm sure folks in the finance world know you very well, but for the UAP crowd, tell us a bit about your professional background.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, it's great to be here. I've been a fan of your show for a while.
Awesome, thank you.
As you noted, I work for one of the largest utility companies in the United States. And so I'm the second in command to the chief investment officer for the department that runs the company's $30 billion investment program. And that's primarily composed of the employee pension and 401k plan that covers about 30,000 active employees and close to an equal number of retirees as well. We also oversee several billion across about a dozen other investment trusts. The day-to-day trading is outsourced to a multitude of external investment managers. A lot of these are some of the world's largest Wall Street firms and hedge funds. My team has oversight for the hiring and firing and monitoring of those managers, and just communicating the broader investment strategy to all the internal committees and board of directors. And I think you hit on earlier too, I had various stints in corporate finance and spent a lot of years in insurance asset management, managing a lot of multi-billion-dollar investment portfolios.
Gotcha. So you work basically as an institutional investor, and as someone that never even took an economics class and, well, quite frankly, barely graduated college. What is the difference between institutional investors and other types of investors, like, I'm guessing, like compared to like venture capitalists or hedge fund investors, et cetera? What, in kind of as simple as you can kind of break it down, what is the difference, or what are the differences?
Yeah, if you really get to the basic level for like a large institutional investor, it's essentially a large organization that is investing money for some later goal. For instance, you could have a pension, and what they're trying to do is ensure the retirees have enough retiree income. And so with that extra cash, they'll have different types of investments. A VC, for instance, would invest in like a Silicon Valley startup. Those are typically early stage. That's in exchange for some type of equity stake. It's usually like a high risk type of investment. And then something like a hedge fund, they pool money from wealthy investors and usually have sophisticated strategies. It's a pretty big ecosystem, but as I kind of just hit on it first, it's really large organizations funding different objectives too.
Got it. Now, when did you actually become interested in the UAP UFO thing? Like, when was the earliest stage you kind of really thought about it, and then when did you begin thinking about it in terms of the financial impact of disclosure on world economies, on our retirements, all that sort of stuff?
Excellent question. There was a few things as I was growing up. I was always into sci-fi. My dad was into supercomputers and a lot of that stuff too. I would say I had a passing interest in UAP, but it wasn't really anything serious at all. There's a few incidents that occurred. When I was around 12, I had a friend, that said the CIA was hiding aliens. And at the time, I just thought that was completely preposterous.
Of course.
My dad at the time actually was doing some contract work at the CIA. So I asked my dad about it.
Wow.
He just thought it was, absurd. So I kind of left it at that. About a year later, I saw the Fire in the Sky story, which was about the Travis Walton abduction, or at least the way they portrayed it. So that shook me a bit and got things back on the radar. So I vacillated between skepticism and having a passing interest. Like everybody else, I think 2017 really put things back onto the map for me. And as the momentum just started building up over the past 2 to 3 years, I started paying more attention. To your point, I didn't really see a lot of people talking about this from a finance perspective. So that really deepened my interest for that too as well. So I would say I'm probably a relative newcomer to this, and I'm just trying to catch up fast to a lot of people that have been at it for decades.
Yeah, no, me, same thing for me as well. So, did you ask your dad about? In the end, did you ask him like, "Hey, what's going on with this whole thing?"
I did actually, and he was completely skeptical. I think he brought things up like Project Blue Book. Obviously, he didn't work for the CIA Office of Global Access that I know of, and he held steadfast to his position.
Yeah, I would imagine if he did work for OGA, it's actually called something different. It's not called the Office of Global Access any longer, but I've been told not to say what it's really called. But something tells me if he did do something like that, and these security oaths, they last for life. You hear a lot of people say, oh well, David Grush and Lue Elizondo, they should just tell everything that they know. But obviously, these non-disclosure agreements are lifelong things. So it doesn't matter if you're working for the CIA, the Pentagon, or whatever. I mean, they take that stuff pretty seriously. Now, so the summer earlier, I think it was back in July, we had one of your colleagues on, David Dorr from the hedge fund group DAM on, and he discussed black swan events. And for our viewers unfamiliar with that term, what is a black swan event? And kind of walk us through what exactly that would be, and how maybe
Sure.
UAP disclosure in a general sense would qualify as that.
Absolutely. A lot of times when you hear the term black swan, it's when something goes disastrously wrong in financial markets. And it's a metaphor that was borrowed from my understanding, back in the 17th century. There was this assumption in Europe that all swans were white until a black one was discovered in Australia. And so that just shows that one observation can essentially have a paradigm shift, based on past incidents.
Right.
Now, the actual definition, which is important, has to do with 3 criteria. A black swan is rare, it has an extreme impact, and then there's like a hindsight component where after it happens, people think, it was a pretty obvious thing that happened. So here's a quick example. If we go back to the 2008 financial crisis, that one caught everybody off guard. For instance, you had a lot of these large financial institutions that suggested a crisis of that magnitude would happen once every 10,000 years. And obviously, a lot of these events happen a lot more frequently. You can go back to something like 9/11, COVID, and a multitude of other things. And there seems to be a compression of when these things are actually happening. A lot of times you only hear about negative examples, but a black swan could actually be positive. So here's one example. The discovery of penicillin. So 1928, Alexander Fleming accidentally discovered that, and that led to the antibiotics that essentially just saved millions of people. So I think the takeaway for these black swans, humans are not necessarily wired for them, and they tend to generalize based on past events after the fact as well.
Now, in terms of like a black swan being a negative event, is that due to a lack of preparation or lack of kind of like forward thinking by investment managers?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think one that we get all the time. By definition, it's actually unpredictable because it's an event that's so far outside the regular expectation. And if we go back to something like the financial crisis, of course, there was a small amount of people that expected that. But I think the way you want to think about it is if it's pretty widespread of having a group or some type of demographic not thinking something could happen, that's usually the indicator. So the takeaway really is, you shouldn't overly rely on predictions. recognize the mental limitations that people have, and embrace that there's just a level of inherent unpredictability to the world and some of our economic models. One actual practical takeaway I can think of this is the author that actually borrowed this metaphor, who was a financial philosopher, his name was Nazim Taleb, I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, is to rank your beliefs by harm caused. So when you believe something, you are trying to assess the accuracy if that belief is true. Now let's take something like UAP disclosure. Let's say you're on the fence about it and you're having more credible people come forward, but you're just not quite sure. If you think that UAP disclosure as a thought exercise could result in just colossal changes up or down, you can assign a number to that. Let's say it's in the trillions because there's technological changes. So if you're on the fence, let's say you think it's 50-50 that this issue is real. If you multiply that 50% by that huge number, your result is a huge number. And I think there's definitely a case from like a finance person to say, hey, this is definitely something worth paying attention to.
And like when I think of like potential black swan events that are out of the UAP world, one of the things that comes to mind is this whole AI thing. Like it seems to me like that all this whole AI issue and the rate of development that AI is sort of happening is, you know, like it. Do you think that AI could be a potential black swan event? Or do you think that there is so much thinking and preparation going into it by the government and the private sector that will mitigate it actually becoming a black swan event?
I'll caveat and say, although I'm not an AI expert, I know there's pretty vigorous debate on that. I think you can look at it a few different ways. More in the near term, you probably have things like deep fakes, issues with cyber security, and leaking of data in the near term. I think further out, this is where you have a lot of debate from different experts. Once you get to the so-called artificial general intelligence or artificial super intelligence, once you could get there in theory, then you start having things where you have some type of runaway AI that might not be aligned with human values. You really don't know what the consequences could be potentially. You could have, let's just say 20 years out, have some AGI that creates some type of nanobot weapon that disrupts cellular function. It just targets biological systems. I mean, that's purely speculative. So I think longer out, that's more what maybe people are thinking about. In terms of right now, I think corporations are just really trying to assess the value proposition. But what I will say from like a financial market perspective, they're obviously putting billions of dollars in it. So there was a quote from the NVIDIA CEO saying, they're going to maybe invest up to $1 trillion, not them, but just industry in general, in data centers over the next 4 years. So I think there are ingredients to be on the brink of an AI arms race, existential crisis, but I wouldn't say the black swan component is a near-term issue. If I actually backtrack to the longer-term part of like the AGI, Ross Coulthard, I think yesterday mentioned something like this. The AI could be a UAP detector further down the road in theory, and you can certainly have some positive aspects about that.
Understood. And so, for instance, like rewinding a bit to AI. So, one of the things that I see obviously is that AI is going to put a lot of people out of work, and of course that is going to have have an effect on people's retirement accounts, things like that. So, how do you, without even being able to sort of extrapolate all of the effects in terms of economic effects by AI on whether somebody's going to have a job. Like, for instance, I was on YouTube the other day and just kind of scrolling around, and it brought up an ad for AI voiceovers. And I'm thinking, you know what? I've for all these years, I've spent, a good bit of money paying for voiceover artists to do work on my political ads. And, here I could probably use AI. I have no idea how good it is. That I'm sure it'd be like a $30 a month subscription. But if you kind of extrapolate that, that's like one industry I'd never even thought of as far as AI having an effect. So, as somebody that is managing these huge retirement funds, how do you protect yourself from those sorts of unknowns and not being able to really kind of fully know at this point what the financial impact of something new like that really taking off?
I think that's the $1 million question. I remember, 3 years ago, there wasn't a lot of discussion just in terms of the research and interaction with some of these investment managers. And now, if you go to conferences, you talk to people on these regular calls, AI is definitely much more prevalent as well. I think there is a lot of unknowns. A lot of economists are a little bit stumped. You can maybe see how things are going to be forecasted in the near term. But there's a lot of vigorous debate if all this capital spend is actually going to manifest. I think there's a case for optimism. And if you look at like the S&P 500 index, the hyperscalers, if you will, are the top 6 or 7 stocks. They represent a lot more than they used to as well. And I think that shows that people are pretty optimistic about it. A lot of it is just making sure to follow things as well. And one thing is, like a financial market professional, you just have to work in a very adaptive environment and consider that things could change pretty quick.
Okay, so of course, with the general public, I would say AI is on everyone's radar, but now let's talk about something that really is not on the mind of the general public, which that needs to change, which is, of course, the subject of UAPs, which, in my view, could be probably one of the most significant black swan events in our history. Are institutional investors preparing for UAP disclosure at all, or is the stigma such that it's just not even being talked about?
I think you bring up a great point if we assume these allegations are true, where it could be the black swan of all black swans. I believe, my good friend David Dorr said it could be the biggest global macro event of all time. My interactions are, there's maybe people talking about it privately, but certainly not at the surface level. I get hundreds of emails of research. I talk to people at conferences. And through all these regular interactions, I have not seen anything at all in terms of UAP to discuss. But I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think, number one, you have the stigma. And the other aspect, too, is, for the more brick and mortar, like the Goldman Sachs, these big Wall Street firms, you tend to have this traditional corporate culture. So if you're stepping out of line, it's just not something that's as easy to do. And there's also structural things, too. So, for instance, if you're sitting in my position and let's say we're, getting rid of an underperforming Wall Street firm and we want to hire somebody else, if we're doing like a due diligence trip and, we're meeting these other people the first time, they're not going to rock the boat in terms of talking about their religious views or anything controversial or something, that's, so-called fringe. So there's a lot of things like that where naturally they're just not going to come up. I will say there's definitely positive developments. If you asked me last year about this, I had talked to some people, and one person I think probably thought I had some type of latent schizophrenia.
Sure.
But this year, I mean, there's a group. Recently I connected. You have an international group of bankers who I'm excited to connect to, and I think events like SALT and what Alex Klokas did by interviewing Carl Nell and then, of course, Gary Nolan last year, I think that moved the needle. And those are the type of things that we definitely need. That was definitely very well received for sure.
Did you find that, like, was your phone blowing up after Carl's speech on SALT? I'm just curious, like, how much traction in the finance world did it get? Was it like, oh my God, I can't believe what this guy said? What was the overall sort of reaction to it?
I would say it was crickets, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. When something's so new and the reaction is well received, but we want to kind of go through this wait and see, we really don't have a baseline. I think it was a lot for people to handle. When you throw something out like that, it's just an epistemological hand grenade. And a lot of people just, will have a hard time processing that kind of thing. I think the way Alex presented it, starting from kind of like a nuts and bolts situation and, kind of taking that Chris Mellon approach, I think that was pretty good for like a hard-nosed crowd for sure. Obviously, for anyone who's looked into this phenomena, it's extraordinarily complex. But, you have to have a starting point. So I don't think that necessarily was a bad thing my phone wasn't blowing up. But I do think some of these private conversations behind the scenes were very helpful. But here's another data point. On the venture capital arena and like the Silicon Valley startup, there's really not a stigma at all in some of the places. I mean, some people think it's right around the corner. And I think a lot of it is, by nature, you have a lot of these folks that are just into frontier technologies, a little bit more open-minded. And you're just going to have people thinking more outside the box, on some of these more speculative things. So in terms of how that's going, I don't think in certain subsectors there's a stigma at all.
Will that sort of open-mindedness in the venture capital arena, do you see that sort of attitude there spilling over into finance, into the finance management end of things, or will it take a while for that to trickle up?
I do. I think this is how I would have expected it to go. And then, having that trickle, because it's inextricably linked to the mainstream financial institutions. You have pension funds that invest in venture capital. So to the extent that some of these technologies get actualized, if, we consider these allegations are true, absolutely. I do think that's something that'll move the needle.
I certainly hope that'll be the case. And do you think that, backing up a bit, so like after the Carl Nell thing came up, I'm sure you're going to have people that say, oh my God, I can't believe this guy said this, but how many folks did you come across in your world that said, I can't believe what this guy said. This is, really pretty shocking. If it turns out what this guy is true, how is this going to affect what we do as finance managers? Did you find that your colleagues made that connection and started teasing that out as far as like, oh, wow, this could really, really affect us in a big way?
No, I didn't. And that's actually something where I'm really concerned about, especially if you're not familiar with the topic. There's this type of chasm of what disclosure means. And I think this is something that applies to the topic in general. We're so focused on figuring out if this situation is real that if these allegations are true and considering what the impact is, there's not really a lot of efforts on the public side, at least, considering that, with the exception of great places like the Soul Foundation. And I think that's something that really needs to be understood, especially if, you have these really, really disruptive type events coming. I think once people really understand the full magnitude of something like that, certainly that's going to, bring that more to the forefront.
Do you think that, for instance, so at the very front of the program, I spoke about the UAP Disclosure Act, which, as I mentioned, Senator Schumer, Senator Rounds, and co-sponsored by Senator Heinrich and Gillibrand, that is up for passage in the Senate for the for the National Defense Authorization Act for 2025. Now, as I mentioned on a previous show, this is going to be a very big hurdle to get this past the Senate. This is, of course, the second time that this is happening, and this language is, I believe, it's just verbatim the same as last year. So, of course, we're likely going to have the same sort of challenges on the House side of making this thing pass, and of course, all of us that are advocating for disclosure, we are of the opinion that this absolutely has to happen. This is the best way to reconciliation for the American government to put this stuff out. Do you think, let's just kind of look into the future. Do you think that if this were to become federal law, the UAP Disclosure Act of 2025, would that be a wake-up call for the finance, for the financial world? Would they say, "Oh my God, this is real. They're really looking into this," or would it take the president getting in front of the podium in the White House in order to sort of cross that threshold mentally for finance managers?
So you have the UAP 2.0, which is, the most extraordinary legislation in American history, and it's being put forth for the second time. In some ways, I'm still surprised that, there's still some of that stigma. I do think it's getting a lot better. Absolutely, if it goes through. I think there's things that are going to happen. One of the issues is that David Grush's claims are falsifiable. And, for some of these actors to come forward and, put some of these debunks, to me, that doesn't make sense. This is definitely something that, would provide a path forward for people. And if this is something that, just in theory, we assume this is, at least some of the allegations are true, and you're going to have some potentially monumental impact on the stock market. And by the way, any monumental impact, it's possible that it doesn't just affect people's 401k. I think there's also this notion that it's only like the top 5%. It's or people that have stocks. In theory, I mean, you could have like a financial meltdown that you go to something like Argentina in 2001. There was issues with their currency, which caused a bank freeze and a paralysis of financial transactions. Now, when you can't do that and you don't have critical infrastructure and things like that, then it's hard to get access to basic necessities like food. That caused civil unrest and ultimately toppled the government. So really, that's the type of picture that that's not my baseline scenario per se that something of that magnitude negatively will happen, but it's just something to think about when you consider some of these claims that have been coming out. I also think that legislation is also very important too, in the sense that as Mark von Rennick had said in an article at The Hill a few weeks back, it's an astounding rebuke of the Pentagon's position on this. So to me, it shows that the Senate Intel Committee obviously, doesn't trust, the current narrative that's being put forth, and they're pretty vigorously going forward with this. And I guess where I'm sitting is joking club, but that's definitely something concerning. And then I'll say, lastly, too, if there is something like this, and we need to process to get some of this information out, I think if there was a catastrophic situation, I know the catastrophic disclosure is a buzzword, but if something like that were to happen and we didn't have a process of something coming out, I think the public blowback would be unprecedented.
What do you mean?
I think people would be extremely angry that there wasn't adequate preparation for something like this. When you have a situation when people are perpetrating a certain stigma, you can't really have a professional and mature and substantial conversation, especially if you're having these conflicting narratives between the Pentagon and Congress. I think that's causing very significant confusion to people. And I would say that's probably a principal reason why, some of the larger financial institutions are kind of in a wait and see attitude. For instance, you have, Arrow coming out and leadership saying, there's nothing to see here. That's from a position of authority. If you're not familiar with the issue, you probably, wouldn't have looked at some of these other things as well. And, there's a million other things going on. So it kind of just falls by the wayside.
Yeah, and as you said, funny enough, that was actually going to be my next question, because it you've got Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the former director of Arrow, who, oh, by the way, is working for the Department of Energy, but for some magical reason is still out there casting shade on David Grush and this whole thing. It's this clear disinformation campaign that you see from the Pentagon and the intelligence community, and in many ways it's almost as if the left hand doesn't know what the other is doing in the government, but certainly this mixed message does nothing but confuse people on Wall Street, investment managers, and in turn that spreading disinformation to the American public, besides being just morally reprehensible, the Pentagon and the CIA, they are putting the American economy, let alone the world economy, at significant risk by really mishandling this. So, yeah, I mean, it seems like if it catastrophically happens, which I think more and more that is a real possibility, people are going to be angry. What would you see as far as like? Do you think there'll be a run on the banks? What do you think like the public's reaction would be in terms of geopolitically or politically? How would that manifest itself?
Yeah, I think that's the million-dollar question for sure of just how this all plays out and, what the second, third, and fourth order effects are. So, I can try to boldly speculate, but I think the takeaway is, when I talk about some of these things, the takeaway for the audience is, we live in a world and it's inextricably connected. Our global financial system is very much connected. Things tend to happen a lot faster than they used to. So thinking about some of the component parts that might be useful are just some of the takeaways as well. If you have this aspect that's a potential constitutional crisis, I think that would lead to a lot of issues. If you have these aerospace companies doing something that they shouldn't be doing, that has a lot of implications. It's something that if there's some level of destabilization, perhaps in the U.S., maybe a geopolitical adversary could take advantage of that as well.
Yeah, that is certainly a possibility. I mean, I think a lot of stuff is on the table. So, if to kind of put it in more of a kind of like tangible way of thinking about it, let's say tomorrow President Biden gets up or does a address in the Oval Office to the nation and the world, declaring that UAPs are real and that there is a non-human intelligence interacting with us. It's been here a long time. We have recovered crashed UAPs, UFOs that we have managed to reverse engineer much of the technology. If this happened tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern time, the following day, because certainly if he did this, it would be after the stock market's closed, but the following day when the New York Stock Exchange opens, what could you possibly predict as far as what the reaction on Wall Street would be? What impact would this new technology and the fact it was hidden, what impact would it have on the markets that following day?
I think it would be extraordinarily disruptive if they admitted there's some type of technological innovation. There would be a lot of questions of how fast could you commercialize that, which, there's a lot of other complexities. But just revealing that there might be breakthroughs all of a sudden, there definitely would be some market speculation and some issues for sure. I mean, that's not to say that people shouldn't go forward with this a certain way just because it's disruptive. But I think you just have to go forward, very, very carefully. The other thing, it's probably going to open a Pandora's box. I think you hit on a lot of these last week, actually, last Sunday. For the president, who knew? When did you know about it? Why didn't you tell us? And I think you're just going to get that whole plethora of a million of questions. You have the sociological consequences, psychological consequences. I'm sure maybe you might have a situation where half the country doesn't believe it, and then they'll need more information. I think depending on who says it, whether it would be, whoever's elected next, I mean, I think that might potentially change the outcome a little bit too, or at least affect it. But, certainly anything technological wise would definitely, cause some volatility in the markets for sure.
Now, one area that a lot of people have brought up, and something I've thought about as well, is so the President Biden gets up, reveals all this stuff, and maybe he's at a press conference, and people say, "Well, how do these things operate? How are they flying at supersonic speeds or hypersonic speeds, etc.?" And the president says, "Well, we've found that these things have essentially they operate off of 0-point energy or just kind of limitless energy, and we think that we might be able to deploy that commercially." How does the world oil economy, which obviously oil drives everything in the world, how does the energy sector, how do they adjust to that? I mean, I literally can't figure out how that is going to be handled, not only in the short term, in terms of the short term reactions, but long term. how do we transform that entire world economy with this potential new technology?
I think if there was some type of 0 point energy breakthrough that made everything obsolete, that would, has the potential to collapse things. One thing I think, people need to take in consideration, if you have it, how long would it take to be commercialized? How long would it take to upgrade our current infrastructure? Is there going to be engineering issues where, this rollout might be 10 or 15 years? And, if you have a longer time frame like that, then I believe that it's possible that you might be able to transition things without displacing thousands of people, for instance. Also, the energy industry is extremely regulated. How would you phase out some of these other technologies? What stakeholders would you involve as well? A longer rollout would probably, be helpful in terms of preparation. But, there's a lot of unknowns. And, just based on the, just quick assumptions, that's kind of what I was, where I would go to too. But I do think there's national security implications for that. If you have a 0 point energy breakthrough, I think you can potentially assume that there's some type of direct energy weapon associated with that. And in terms of, a rogue actor getting that, I think that's certainly a danger. Is there a danger of an uncontrolled explosion from a 0 point energy plant, if that's possible? It's a lot of those things I think, you would have to take into consideration as well.
I mean, it certainly does. Now, what about, again, with the whole energy thing? So what about, how does this potentially affect the political stability of large energy producers, say in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia and others? How does that jeopardize the political stability in general? That, hey, this maybe this new energy source, the 0 point thing, is 5-10 years out, but just right out the gate, is it going to affect the Middle East and how things are done there and the regimes that are part of these oil-based countries?
I think so. I think it would have an absolutely potentially profound effect. So you take Saudi Arabia, for instance. Oil exports are a cornerstone of their economy. So a collapse in oil demand would just have such a devastating effect. They control about something like 17 to 20% of the world's oil supply. They lead OPEC. 70 to 80% of their revenue from their government is from oil. And if you have a collapse there, they could face a severe economic crisis, which could lead to social unrest, potentially undermining their stability. And because of that, I think there would probably be some geopolitical realignments. And so with all these types of moving parts, I think these are things that just, people have to consider. And that doesn't mean that I think there should be some type of slow drip disclosure with continued obfuscation. But I think your question is actually a good example of, some of the severe effects that could happen, assuming there would be that level of technology released to the public.
But do you think that in general, if let's say like all this technology rolls out in terms of the knowledge, do you think slow rolling the technology over, say, like a 10-year period, is that going to mitigate the volatility if the president or whoever comes and says, you know what, we've got this stuff, but we're going to take our time putting it out? Does that mitigate the volatility, the potential geopolitical unrest, if right out the gate the government is saying, look, we're not popping this out onto the market this Christmas?
I think there's an argument to be made for a phased rollout like that, because you could potentially get your workforce a little bit more ready. You would be able to upgrade your infrastructure. You would be able to involve some of the other stakeholders and figure out a way to build the correct regulatory scaffolding for something like this to come out. You might be able to mitigate national security issues related to that. So I think being able to, have a longer time frame certainly could be very beneficial. On the other hand, there may be like a very urgent need to be a first mover on this. And so if a geopolitical adversary is rolling this out faster, that might be something to consider as well. So I think there's just numerous ways you could cut this to as well. But I do think that, there's definitely an argument to, roll this out and, proceed very carefully. Generally speaking, the more disruptive a technology is and the faster you bring it out, the potential for an adverse consequences would increase, in my view.
Like, what would be some examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, so you think of something like, people think about AI, and this is vigorously debated, where ChatGPT is rolling things out just incrementally. They obviously have models that are, a bit further out behind the scenes, but they're testing that and they're ensuring that it's working as they expected, and seeing how the public reacts to it, just to ensure there's not adverse issues.
So
I'm not saying that's necessarily the way to go, but just an example of people trying to approach things with a little bit more caution.
Yeah, I wonder how much of the kind of like economic uncertainty plays in the executive branch, plays into the executive branch's decision making as to whether they're going to dump all of this. I would think that would be probably one of the major components, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't envy people being on the other side of that. It just seems like there's numerous consequences. I think it was held put up at the Sol Foundation where they did an exercise of, should you have disclosure or not? And I think they all came back as no. Stock market crash was one of them as well. So, I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how you can do something like this too.
Do you think that if the risk, the catastrophic economic risks, are they enhanced, or are they any worse if let's say like one of our geopolitical rivals decides to announce first? So, case A, the American president goes and tells everybody what the government's been lying about, or case B, China comes out and says, "Oh, by the way, this is what the American government has been lying about." Would you say that there would be any kind of different reaction in the markets if Russia or China came out first and said, "Oh, by the way, U.S. has been lying about this for 70 years," versus the downstream consequences of the American president doing it himself?
I think so. If you had a country like China releasing that, I'm thinking what would come to mind. Maybe they want to show their technological prowess. I think regardless of whoever discloses, it probably exposes the world's military powers of deceit. There's probably going to be the presumption the U.S. knows about it. If there was any desire to control the narrative or the messaging, that might force the U.S.'s hand, and that could lead to issues where there's some destabilization that they could take advantage of. I think there would be probably geopolitical realignments that they think, China's challenging, the world's superpower. You might have China just start being more aggressive, with issues in the South China Sea and Taiwan. And then you think about all their alliances too. It doesn't sit well with me like a country like North Korea would have access to that type of technology for sure. I think the potential blowback to the U.S. May not be great as well. And, of course, this is pure speculation, but those are some of the things that come to mind for sure.
Well, and it would seem to me
it's a great thing.
Yeah, sure, of course. Well, and it would seem to me that if I were just China and Russia, and I decided that I really wanted to damage the United States politically, and let's say China or Russia, they've figured out all 5 secret keys to make these crashed UAPs that they possess work. If I were China or Russia and I went and disclosed the truth to the world, I would probably do a show and tell saying, "Hey, this is what we have. And oh, by the way, the United States has had this for much longer than we have. And the United States has been lying to all of you, including all of you that are in strategic alliances with the United States. They had no plans. The United States had no plans of coming clean about this. But, China, or if I'm Russia, hey, we believe in transparency. We're new to this whole thing, and we decided, you know what? It's not a good idea that the United States is lying to the world, but, all talking to all the friends, all of you that are aligned with the U.S., they've been lying to you this whole time." I mean, that seems to have the potential for just incredible geopolitical damage to our geopolitical standing in the United States, and therefore the economic, downstream economic consequences of that geopolitical damage to the United States on world markets. Would you think?
Yeah, and here's another thing too, which was brought up, that if they have these technologies, if the U.S. has these technologies and they're hyper compartmentalized. I remember Ross Coulthard was saying something at SEU where somebody was looking at a picture of a metamaterial for 20 years on a black and white paper, couldn't talk to anybody next to them. If we're trying to advance and be able to defend that type of stuff, I think that's a huge problem with that compartmentalization. That seems like it would be a national security issue. I don't know if China's doing the same thing like that, but you would think if they're, putting a lot of resources toward that, that seems like it would be a problem, at least on that aspect as well. And I think you had another point too, just from an economic perspective. The U.S. could be seen as like a laggard too, not an industry leader. If you have a country like China, having this superior technology, and certainly that's going to have a lot of different consequences.
Well, the other thing too. Yeah, and when of course I think like one of the consequences as well, you spoke about this earlier, like if the president comes out and he discloses this, literally half the country, if it's Biden, the Republicans aren't going to believe him. If it's a Republican in office, Democrats aren't going to believe him, just purely from a political point of view, not even like counting the ontological shock of this. But I would, I would think that in and of itself just really puts the United States in a bad light. And the other thing that I could see happening as well, China or Russia reveals first, and they know that the only way to convince the world that they are not just blowing smoke is to have a show and tell. Roll up the garage door. Here's this UAP. Here's this biological entity that we got a hold of only 5 years ago because we're new to this. Then the following day, people are going to be asking the president, well, what do you have? What do we have as a country? China and Russia have these things. Do you guys not have these? Or are they really telling the truth that you've been lying to us, your citizens, all along? Well, of course, the president is going to be put in a rock and a hard place. He's going to have to say, well, yep, actually, we do have quite a few of these things. We could have a whole Uber fleet if we wanted. The loss in confidence in our American democracy, the loss in confidence, already we have, I don't know what the percentage is, but a very large percentage of the American public does not trust what the American government tells them. This is just going to amplify this if somebody does this first, if it's China or Russia. So when you look at all of that, if you were the president and thinking about it from an economics point of view, would you say, you know what, it's time to rip off the Band-Aid? Or would you say, let's maybe kick the can down the road?
Yeah, I think despite the negative consequences, I think, being able to do this carefully absolutely makes sense. There's a lot of positive benefits to humanity. I think that's really, one of the big pieces about this. And to the extent that you can maintain national security while getting that out for the U.S. to be an industry leader, I think that's absolutely important for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And as I've said time and time again, this is going to come out. It is going to come out soon, and it is up to the government, United States government, whether they want to fumble the ball or if they want to take the ball and run it in for a touchdown. Really quickly, I just want to say thank you to Science Bob for the super chat. We've had Science Bob on our show before. Love Science Bob. That guy's an absolute character. And then also a Sage Sleuth. Thank you as well for the super chat donation. These donations and being financial supporters of our show is what allows us to bring you this show and great guests like Erik. Now, I want to switch gears for a second. And again, I know a lot of this is into speculative territory. But what David Grush and what others, and Lue Elizondo, as I understand it, alleges this as well in his book, is that defense contractors such as Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Aerospace Corporation, and others have crashed UAPs. They have it as part of special access programs or controlled access programs. Back in November, myself, Christopher Sharp, and Josh Boswell, we wrote a very extensive article for the Daily Mail where we laid out in extreme detail about how the CIA has been running, how the CIA owns the whole UAP UFO portfolio, how the CIA illegally has been running crash retrieval operations under their Directorate of Science and Technology and under an organization under DS&T called the Office of Global Access. One of the things that we discovered through interviewing a lot of folks that were involved in these sorts of activities is we were told half of the crash recovery operations were tasked to JSOC, or Joint Special Operations Command. So Office of Global Access sends a JSOC team of Tier 1 operators, be it Navy SEALs, whatever, to go and pick up these things from our neighbors from out of town and take them back to some lab, Area 51, or God knows where they're taking these things. But then the other 50%, what we were told, is specifically tasked for recovery by the private aerospace corporations. So what I mean by that is Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, all of these folks, they have security contractors that work for them that are in charge of not only the sort of cyber security of their special access programs and controlled access programs, but also physical security. So people like Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and others have a security contractor team that exists of former Tier 1 operators. So what happens is half the time when these these vehicles of non-human origin go and crash, and we have a system in place, that was confirmed through several sources. We have an ISR platform that can track this stuff in real time, whether it's cloaked or not, determine when it's crashed, and then they immediately generate an operation that'll either go to JSOC to pick up the crashed UAP, or it'll go to the private defense contractor. Which one of the things we were not able to discover is how that decision process was made. In other words, what the Office of Global Access, how they determined what went to what recovery operation went to JSOC versus what recovery operation went to a private aerospace company such as Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, all of these folks, and so these folks, from what we have understood from multiple sources that have worked in this particular area in the government, they have said that these companies have these reverse engineering programs. They are part of waived special access or unacknowledged special access programs or controlled access programs, and that they are hiding these things, of course, from the American people, but they're also hiding it from Congress. Congress is supposed to control the purse strings of the intelligence community and the Pentagon, so when I think to myself, let's say Boeing or Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman, they've got a whole fleet of these things, and they are working to harness the intellectual property off of these things so that it is their intellectual property. But because it's classified and they can't talk about it, it seems to me that would affect the defense contractors' ability to be honest about their market valuations. It would seem to me that they cannot figure into the valuation of their company when they're telling the Security Exchange Commission, the SEC, or their shareholders and their shareholder meetings. They are having to lie to all of these folks because they can't come clean about what they have. Now, let's say that from what we understand as well, a lot of these gifts from the American government of these things from our neighbors, not from around here, that these were given in a no-bid contract, under no-bid contract. So a bunch of this stuff given to Northrop Grumman or Boeing or whatever, and then let's say that Lockheed Martin doesn't have these things. If I were Lockheed Martin, I would go and I would sue the hell out of people. So in a very long-winded way, it seems that there has been a lot of illegal independent research and development contracts from the Pentagon, either in the form of IRADs or other means. And let's say then the president comes out tomorrow, as I theorized, and says, we have these things, but we've also given them to Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Aerospace Corporation. And the public then has knowledge about this, and the knowledge that they have the valuation of all these stocks that Mom and Pa Kettle have in Boeing, that these have been falsified. How would this affect institutional investors who hold significant stock positions in these defense contractors?
This is very serious business. I'm going to back up really quick too, just for a little bit of a backdrop. So National Defense Authorization Act of 2010 said the Pentagon had to be audit ready by 2017. And from 2018 to 2023, the Pentagon failed 6 audits. And what were the findings? Material weaknesses, a culture resistant to change, and just improper, controls. So as a chief financial officer, the fact is, if you had an organization like that, the propensity for fraud increases. That's just a fact. So that's the operating environment. Now, if you think of something like Lockheed Martin, I'm going to go back to Enron in 2001. That was one of the most massive frauds in American history. And, that basically destroyed their auditor, Arthur Anderson, which, had tens of thousands of people because they were, found basically complicit with that. And they were convicted of, massive accounting fraud. From that, you had, executives in prison. You had the passage of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, and, which necessitated a lot of accounting controls. And that's still not an insignificant part of my job. The other aspect about that 2002 SOX issue is that executives and like the chief financial officer have to sign and certify the financial statements. If you knowingly certify a financial statement that's false, you could be criminally prosecuted. And that's exactly what happened with Enron. Now, if you go to the aerospace companies, I think, and I'm not a securities lawyer, it seems like the most salient aspect is, whether there's going to be some type of amnesty. But in terms of just some of the reporting, if you're a publicly traded company, you are required to, submit a lot of filings, because the SEC essentially says you have to do that. And if you are not recording things and you're having financial statements you have to restate because, these things aren't being reported, if there's these unacknowledged, SAP programs that are not overseen by Congress, that are facilitating these illegal IRADs, and there's like a cash transaction or a hand receipt, that's serious business. And furthermore, if that's gone back decades, the effects of that could be just absolutely devastating. In terms of just, would there be a shareholder lawsuit? If there's not an amnesty provision, I think so. That's absolutely happened with places like Enron. There's a lot of things that were breached. There's like fiduciary duty breached by the board of directors. People are going to ask, who knew? Like, how far did this go? Did the CEO know? Is there just a program manager? Are the stock analysts on these quarterly earnings calls asking investor relations? I'm guessing a small portion of the company probably knew. And I don't wish any ill will on the aerospace companies. Hopefully, there's something that can be done so tens of thousands of people aren't potentially affected. But that type of situation, to me, just reading it as an investment person, is very concerning. In terms of how it would be affected, what happens if these things happen is investors aren't really too kind to it. The stock price could absolutely plummet for sure, and that would affect the holdings of these pension funds, mutual funds, and have a trickle effect. And then I'm thinking there's probably potentially national security implications because they provide a critical service. So this just seems like a mess. I think David Dorr, mentioned it could go the other way if there's amnesty because they have this technology. So I think that's certainly possible. Really, my point is I think there's a lot of serious issues that are here that I think people really need to be aware of.
In terms of, so you mentioned that the C-suite in the company, the CEO, CFO, they have to sign off on all of these financials that they basically have to say these financials are truthful and we're not hiding anything and all of that sort of stuff. And then, of course, it comes out, oh, by the way, they have been hiding all of this. Are we talking like, you mentioned that there's criminal liability. Are we talking about criminal liability that could land the CEO, the CFO in federal prison, that kind of criminal exposure?
Without a doubt. You look at Enron and, I think it was Jeffrey Scaling, he was in jail for, I'm not sure the exact date, 15 years or something. You look at like WorldCom in 2006. You look at places like Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos. I think she had like 7 years for misleading investors. So yeah, this is absolutely serious business. You will have like a derivative lawsuit against the executives in addition to potential shareholder lawsuits.
And then if we tease it out, and let's say, for instance, that it comes out that part of the people that have been engaged in kinetic or physical retaliation against potential whistleblowers are the security contractors that are operating for Lockheed Martin, for Northrop Grumman. So let's say that it comes out that people have been knocked off or killed over this kind of thing, and that the C-suite at Boeing or Lockheed Martin or whoever was aware of these criminal activities. Would just that knowledge, that public knowledge in and of itself, absolutely tank the stock prices for Boeing, for Lockheed Martin, for Northrop Grumman? Would it just blow it into smithereens because people would go, why do I want to have my money invested in stocks supporting criminal behavior by these aerospace companies?
Absolutely. It could be certainly devastating for sure. And you could have a precipitous decline very, very quick for something of that magnitude. Absolutely.
How do you think in general, like how can we get this topic front and center without the stigma in front of the institutional investors, your colleagues that you work with?
That's a great question. I was talking to David Dorr about that for different things. I think the way Alex approached it in terms of interviewing Carl Nell, that was a good start. Conferences are a great start. For financial news, you basically have Bloomberg and CNBC. I think you need more folks there. I think people certainly need to get informed on the topic and not be afraid about the stigma. I think more credible people talking about it and teasing out some of these implications are very important. Having these types of professional conversations with suspending judgment. One thing I need to go back really quick with the aerospace company too. Even if you think this is just a terrestrial type phenomena, right? And there's these illegal IRADs and unacknowledged wave special access programs facilitating that. And there's issues of congressional oversight. The fact is that if you have a potential constitutional crisis and the embezzlement of taxpayer money, that's still a problem for financial markets. So really, in my view, no matter how you cut the situation, financial markets need to pay attention to that. And this is just narrowing the aperture a small amount. So, those are the things I think people need to be aware of. What is really the impact of all of this? This whole potential UAP disclosure and so forth as well. But absolutely, just getting more credible people speaking about this in a very mature way without the type of judgment treating people with, the right level of respect that have, had, anomalous incidents.
Do you think? Well, here's a question for you in terms of a corporate liability. Let's say that you have a deputy at Northrop Grumman or Lockheed Martin that has run this entire program and maybe didn't tell the CEO. I don't see how that would possibly happen, but didn't tell the CEO or the CFO about these holdings. Would the CFO, CEO, and other members of the C-suite that could truly say they did not have knowledge of this, would that absolve them of any criminal liability?
That's a good question. And, I'll say this without being, a attorney that's qualified for that as well. On one hand, it could potentially be somewhat contained, but for the CEO or CFO, you're responsible for, having the different controls to prevent this kind of thing. So it happened on your watch and you didn't catch that. I mean, for instance, if you have, like a JP Morgan and you have a chief risk officer and you have some rogue trader that made some billion-dollar mistake, that chief risk officer is going to go because it's ultimately under their watch. So something similar certainly could happen. But, potentially there might be some containment, maybe they're absolved of the criminal liability for sure. But I can't imagine that they necessarily would stay in that position.
Yeah, the other question that I would have as well is there's got to be some kind of legal agreement between the United States government and these contractors when they say, we're going to give you things that are not from this world, or certainly not made by non-human hands. We're giving this thing to you. You can control it and reverse engineer it. I wonder if there is either, I would think, maybe I'm wrong, but I would think that there would be some kind of legal framework, because if I were Boeing or Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman, I would, say, well, hey, what if this gets out? What is our legal and financial exposure going to be if this thing were to pop out? If the United States government is giving us this stuff and telling us to be quiet about it, does that mean that the Justice Department cannot come after us criminally? Like those are sorts of what I wonder what sort of agreements are in place that maybe gave some assurances to these private contractors, or if they didn't, these aerospace companies may have said, what, it's worth the risk. What the amount of money that we're going to make off of capitalizing off of this reverse engineered technology, we're gonna take the risk. I just wonder if there is something in there possibly that they know they've got to get out of a jail card for free. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would think that they probably thought that, because this evidently is not really a new thing for the aerospace companies. So I certainly think something like that for sure is plausible.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, one of the hot button topics that was part of the UAP Disclosure Act of 2024 was this thing in there called eminent domain, and essentially what it said was that if you are in possession of any material of non-human origin, engineered material, craft, or biological specimens, whatnot, if you are in possession of it, it doesn't matter if you're an individual or an aerospace corporation, we, the government, have the right to come take that back. Now, you heard from people like the former director of the UAP task force and Brandon Fugel and Travis Taylor of Skinwalker Ranch fame. We know that they lobbied the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Mike Turner, to kill the bill because of that whole eminent domain clause in the UAP Disclosure Act. And of course, that clause is back in there today. Just, as a finance guy, as somebody that has worked in corporate America for a long time, what are your thoughts on this whole concept of eminent domain as it relates to UAP?
I think it's not a black and white issue. I think it's complex. I'm thinking, the Travis Taylor and Brandon Fugel, if there's something at Skinwalker Ranch, they probably don't want the government seizing it just from everything they're doing and, drilling in that so-called mesa, and I don't say that have an opinion, whatever something's there or not. I think of, a situation with Jacques Vallée. I thought there was something about purported metamaterial. I do think for the eminent domain, it does have a process for the aerospace company. Maybe you can narrow the aperture for, just having this at aerospace companies, if that's even a possibility. I do think it's a path to obtain physical evidence. If Brush said, here's the names, locations, and addresses of where these things are, to the inspector general, it's found credible and urgent. That is a path to get that. And I think, it's important to have this act passed. And, maybe there needs to be adjustments for that. I know there's vigorous debates. There's probably a lot of complexities I'm not thinking of. I do think that's very important. How do you actually access this kind of thing too? And one thing going back to these aerospace companies as well, if, let's say a year ago, you're Lockheed Martin, the Schumer amendment's going to pass with this eminent domain. If you're trying to divest an asset and moving these things around and that comes out later, to me, that shows that you are tacitly admitting some level of wrongdoing. And, there was rumors about this before, if you think this eminent domain is coming. And something like that would have immense blowback. So, just wanted to add that in just with the whole eminent domain.
So it's essentially what you're saying, because of course there's been talk for quite some time that Lockheed Martin is trying to divest themselves of craft that was given to them by the United States government of non-human origin. So what you're saying is them divesting themselves or attempting to divest themselves could be viewed as they understand that they are criminally liable for holding these materials.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to me, that's like a tacit admission. Absolutely.
And is there any strategic or legal or economic advantage in them doing that? In other words, is it better for them to just hold on to this stuff and then it comes out that they have it and they roll up the garage door and say, here's what we have? Or is it better for them to divest themselves of it and then when it comes out later that they had this stuff before, is one better than the other?
I'm guessing from their perspective, if they think they can get this asset off their balance sheet, if it was ever reported or, maybe move it across a different country, that there really wouldn't be some type of forensic audit trace. I think you can cut it both ways. I think if they thought they were going to get some amnesty, it would be better. But, I'm thinking there was probably a lot of complexity related to that decision too. And they probably thought that they could conceal it if that actually happened.
Right. Yeah, that is a question. Do you think that the passage of the UAP Disclosure Act will, do you think it'll just kind of generate a panic within these defense contractors, or do you think they'll be like, oh, we'll figure out how to deal with this?
I would think so. I mean, you look at the Schumer amendment last year and how it was gutted, and Mike Turner being in the Wright-Patterson district. So I mean, to me, just all the indications show that they absolutely would be concerned about it, which they should.
They absolutely should. So how can folks at home, the sort of home investor, message to their brokerages that this thing needs to be taken seriously?
Yeah, I think that's a complex question. First, we need to reduce the stigma. We need to be informed on the topic. Here's one good starting point, I think, too, for a finance person. At the Sol Foundation, you had a brilliant former Bank of England analyst named Helen McCaw, who had some great papers of how central banks are affected. I think that's a good segue for finance people getting into the topic. I think just certainly following the legislation with the UAPDA, it's extremely important that this UAPDA passes, and it's extremely important to stay informed on it, because obviously the legacy media has completely failed at this. If this was any other topic with these financial implications, there's no way this would not be covered. And it's to me, it's completely astounding how it's not covered.
It is. It's completely astounding. That is for sure. What about getting I've never been to a shareholder meeting. Like, at a shareholder meeting for Boeing, can anybody that attends the meeting stand up and ask a question regarding this?
I think you have the right qualifications and the right amount of shares held. You certainly could. If you have some of these stock analysts, because you have, what they call sell side research at investment banks, where these people just follow the company, they talk to management, they rate the stock, and they figure out, how much is this worth. If I was in that position, I would be asking these questions as well. I'm guessing there's probably that stigma, and they think, well, it's unsubstantiated. The investor relations are just going to say it's not there. But those people have influence because a lot of the stock price is, just the perception too. The CFO has to answer to those types of people. So I do think those things actually matter of asking those questions. Absolutely. Even things like where Chris Sharp will, ask things, to Lockheed Martin, they'll refer them to the DoD, things like that. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, Erik, thank you. Thanks for joining us. And once again, you are offering your personal opinions, your personal perspectives on this. This in by no way is any reflection of the views of Pacific Gas and Electric. I want to be very, very clear about that. But I really appreciate you coming back or coming on the show and sharing your thoughts about this and how this is really a very important issue. So how can people at home follow your work?
Absolutely. So feel free to list my LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to respond to different messages. This is really important. This is a very serious topic, and I'm happy to help in any way I can. So other than that, it's a pleasure being here. I've always been a fan of your show, so thanks so much for having me on.
I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll definitely have you back on again, hopefully to celebrate the passage of the UAP Disclosure Act.
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks,
All right, Erik Zidek, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, great. That was really, really fantastic. I think just in general, of course, everyone understands that this coming out is going to have downstream economic consequences. I mean, there's really just kind of no way about that, or no way around that. The question is, and I mentioned this at the very beginning of the show, is how it's handled. If as Colonel Carl Nell spoke about this whole idea of catastrophic disclosure versus controlled disclosure. The idea being is it is very difficult to predict what the downstream second and third order consequences of UAP disclosure by the United States government, what those consequences are going to be. Certainly there are going to be a lot that are not good. There are certainly ones that are going to be a positive for us as the human race, but nonetheless there are going to be consequences. The only way, and I'm saying this to our friends on Capitol Hill that watch this show, people in Congress and their staffers, the only way to mitigate those risks is to be proactive, is to not just throw caution into the wind, or for the United States government to continue, and in particular the executive branch to continue to bury their heads in the sand about this. It is going to come out. It is coming out. Period. The end. You can absolutely take that to the bank. So people in our government need to really sit and think about, if this is coming out, and it is, do we want to be ahead of the curve? Do we want to really, as opposed to continue to lie to the American public and Congress, do we want to be proactive and start thinking about the weighing the risks? Really kind of, in my view, comes down to two decisions they have to make. The United States government, in particular, the Pentagon and the intelligence community. They either do what they've been doing for over 70 years, which is lying to the American public about it, lying to Congress, hiding it from everybody, and encouraging every administration that comes in, because we know this is classified under executive order, and that is why members of Congress cannot get at this stuff. They have a decision to make, whether they continue to kick the can down the road as they've been doing for 70, 80 some odd years, or they finally say, you know what, this is coming out. We had better get ahead of this and be proactive about it, pull our heads out of the sand and figure out how we are going to roll this out, how we are going to talk about this with our world financial leaders, talk about this with market leaders in world financial markets, market leaders in on Wall Street, people like Erik Zidek, who are in charge of $30 billion of investments. The U.S. government has to understand that there is no other choice for our government. They must do the right thing, and Congress has the power to do this by passing the UAP Disclosure Act. The status quo is not maintainable. This is going to come out. And whether it goes well for the United States government or whether it goes poorly for the United States government, how that turns out is based solely on how the government decides to finally come to terms with this whole thing and handle it in a proactive way that will mitigate the risks to Wall Street. None of us want a financial collapse in the United States, in the markets of the financial markets of the United States. We certainly don't want that kind of impact or collapse to happen on the world financial market stage. And we know, because we are such an economic superpower, that whatever we do economically and whatever economic policy comes out of the United States government, all of that directly affects world financial markets. They are interlinked in a way that cannot be separated. So if the U.S. government, in particular Congress, in particular the people that could potentially stand in the way of the passage of the UAP Disclosure Act for the National Defense Authorization Act, people like Mike Turner, Congressman Mike Turner, people like Democrat Jim Himes, who continues to throw out just tropes and pejoratives regarding the UAP thing, the UAP topic, by trying to throw cold water on it, by these professional debunkers that continue to spread their propaganda to encourage members of Congress to stop looking into this stuff. This is going to end up blowing up on our government, and it's not going to go well for them. But more importantly, it is not going to go well for all of us Americans and people worldwide from an economic point of view. Because what is going to end up happening when this comes out, and it is coming out, and the United States government or Congress blocks this UAP legislation, when it comes out, just the sheer political and economic gross damage that revelation will have on the American economy, on the world economy, is almost incalculable. I spoke earlier about whether Russia or China decides to go first. It would be a geopolitical win for them to do that. There is really, in many ways, no incentive for them not to do that. And the geopolitical damage to the United States, the economic damage to the United States, the economic damage to our investments as investors, be it private investing in stocks, or just what happens to your 401k, what happens to your pension. The sheer destruction that will have economically on the United States by the United States government not handling this correctly will be unimaginable. And what will prevent that from happening is for the United States Congress to pass the UAP Disclosure Act for 2025. That must pass. That is the only way our legislators can compel, can force the deputy level folks in the Pentagon, the deputy level folks in the CIA and the intelligence community and the Department of Energy. That is the only legal mechanism that will force them to dump this. It has to happen. There is no other way. Now, people will argue, well, you know what? I think, there are people that said, oh, well, there's the eminent domain thing is an issue. And certainly there are some legal questions, and they are fair questions to be asking. But no piece of legislation, folks, as we all know, is perfect. Nothing is. Nothing in life is perfect. Nothing in life is black and white. And to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I'm speaking to you, Travis Taylor. I'm speaking to you, Brandon Fugel. I'm speaking to you, Jay Stratton, to go and lobby for Congress to throw this entire legislation out the window. Brandon Fugel, Travis Taylor, Jay Stratton, you are jeopardizing the national security of the United States, full stop. Because if you and others derail this legislation, it's not going to go well. And it is going to basically force a catastrophic disclosure. And it is going to happen. This disclosure is going to happen one way or the other. It's going to happen catastrophically, or it's going to happen in a controlled way. And the only way to control disclosure is by passing the UAP Disclosure Act for the National Defense Authorization Act of 2025. Period. The end. Now, the question is, and people often ask this, why do we need eminent domain? Here's the issue. This entire thing is classified under executive order. It is classified at the same level as our nuclear war plan. It is classified at the same level as our continuity of government or COG operations. Those things, those special access programs, those CAPs, those controlled access programs sit in the White House under presidential executive order to have them classified under presidential emergency action action directives. I can never remember the acronym for PEDS, but that's where they sit. So I told this on our last show. There was an example of, I believe it was a chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And of course, Senate Armed Services Committee deals with the policy, the nuclear policy of the United States of America. This chair of, it was either Senate Arms or Senate Intel, went to the White House, went to the Department of Energy and said, I want to see what our nuclear war plan is. I want to see what the SIOP, it's called something differently now, but the SIOP, which stood for Single Integrated Operational Plan, we want to know what sits in the SIOP. What did the White House and the Department of Energy tell this chairman in Congress? They told him to take a hike because it was classified as a PED. It was classified in the executive branch, and therefore the legislative branch did not have the legal right to view those classified products. Now, how does that relate to eminent domain? The purpose of eminent domain is to prevent private aerospace contractors from not even opening up the door. That is why it's there. It is there to ensure that this presidential appointed commission that would sit in the White House, this blue ribbon panel, this would ensure that this panel has full access to anything that Lockheed Martin, that Northrop Grumman, that Boeing, that Aerospace Corporation has stashed away of non-human origin. Because if that clause is not in there, these aerospace companies, these defense contractors, they can tell this White House committee, you know what? This is all our private property. There is no legal reason we have to show you in the White House what we have stashed away. We do not legally have to tell this committee what the government has given us and what we have illegally been hiding from Congress and the American people. This ensures that committee that sits under the executive branch, this ensures that they have access to it. Now, it doesn't mean that the purpose of this, I can tell you absolutely, this does not mean that the United States government is going to show up at Brandon Fugel's property and dig up and take away whatever is sitting at Skinwalker Ranch. This does not mean that the United States government is going to show up to Northrop Grumman's doorstep and said, we are taking back these vehicles that you have stashed away and that you've been hiding from people and engaging in retaliation to try and keep it secret. That is not the purpose of that. The purpose is purely to ensure that this committee has visibility and has the legal mechanism to force these private aerospace companies, these private defense contractors, these publicly traded defense contractors, it forces them to disclose what they are hiding. It is the only way to do that. It is the only way. Now, obviously, there can be tweaks to this legislation. We don't want the United States government to come and show up at my doorstep and decide they're going to, repossess my iPad or something like that. But that mechanism must be there. It is the only way to give this commission the legal teeth to ensure that Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Aerospace Corporation cannot continue to hide this stuff from the American public, from their investors, from the Security Exchange Commission, a whole host of things. It is the only way to do it. Now, the second question some people have asked, why is this whole board, this blue ribbon panel, why is it necessary? Why can't it go in, just be part of a congressional committee or congressional special committee? Why does it have to be in the White House? The answer is this. Because the UAP issue is classified under executive order in the executive branch, because it sits in PEDS, because it sits under executive order, and that is how they have been able to keep this can of worms locked up, because Congress legally cannot compel the executive branch to disclose things like nuclear war plans, like COG operations. You have to put this committee within the White House in order to have any chance of getting at it. Period, the end. That is the only way to do it. It's got to sit under the executive branch. Now, there is no absolute guarantee, from what I understand, that the executive branch will expose these presidential emergency directives to this panel, but it is the best chance that we have. So, in conclusion, just kind of wrapping this up here, this all comes down to the UAP Disclosure Act passing. It is not guaranteed that it is going to pass even the Senate. It is important that all of us as grassroots activists, it is important that all of us as Americans that care for our country and care for doing the right thing, it is important for all of us that are Americans to reach out to our lawmakers to reach out to our senators, to reach out to our congressmen and women and say, we know this is going on. We know the United States government has been lying to us for all of this time. We know as a country that we are ready for the Band-Aid to be pulled off. It is incumbent on all of you at home that are watching this show right now to call your lawmakers' offices, to email your lawmakers' offices, senators and congressmen and women, to message them and say, we demand that the UAP Disclosure Act of 2025 not only pass the Senate hurdle, but pass the House hurdle, and that it is enacted for the National Defense Authorization Act. It is the only way at this juncture to make this happen, to get to the truth, to end this systemic perversion of our democracy. It is the only way to make that come to an end. And as I've said time and again, the path to reconciliation for those of you in the government, particularly in the CIA and the Pentagon, that have all of you that are the deputy level officials. It is all of you, the deputy level, senior executive service level people that have been hiding this. We know who you are. We have the names. We know who you are. You have to sit and really think hard. Do I want to do the right thing for the country and say, you know what? We made some really bad decisions as a country. We made really bad decisions at the deputy level in the Pentagon and the CIA. We made bad decisions, but you know what? We did the best we could. We thought at the time it was the right thing to do, but you know what? This thing is metastasized into something that it was never meant to be. All of you in the Pentagon, Kathy Hicks, others, you know what you know, and you know that this cannot go on forever. And the best thing you can do, the most patriotic thing you can do for this country is to say enough's enough. This is what we did. We did some bad things. All countries make mistakes. All countries do bad things. But you know what? Let's do the right thing. Let's get this thing out. Let's all march towards a path of reconciliation. That will go so much better for all of you, deputy level folks, in the senior executive service. It's going to go so much better for all of you and for our country in general, and economically for our country, to do the right thing, come clean about it. And the best way we can compel that to happen is to call our lawmakers and tell them that we, the American public, demand the passage of the UAP Disclosure Act of 2025, authored by Senator Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Republican Senator Mike Rounds, and co-sponsored by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and Senator Martin Heinrich. It is time. It is time to do the right thing. And in doing the right thing is preparing the American financial markets for this inevitability. It is by preparing world financial markets for this inevitability. Because if this legislation does not go through, it is going to set us back considerably, but more importantly, it amplifies by a untold factor the chance of catastrophic disclosure. And none of us want that. We all love our country. I know all of you in the SES, the Senior Executive Service level administration, senior Executive Service in both the Pentagon and the CIA that have been managing all of this. And there's around 50 of you that have been managing all of this. We know you love your country as well. But there comes a time where the lying has to stop. And when you know you're about to be called out, and when you know your names are going to be out in public, it's better to just do the right thing. It's better for the country. It's better for your personal soul and sense of self, and knowing that you did the right thing in the country. When Kathy Hicks can go and look at herself in the mirror, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, look at herself in the mirror and go, you know what? I made the right decision for my country to say enough's enough, boys and girls. It's time this come out. It's time that we have a honest to God conversation with the National Security Council of the Biden administration, with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and say, you know what, guys, this is coming out. It's coming. We need to get ahead of this. We can't keep kicking the can down the road, because the consequences for doing that are just simply too profound. So in closing, all of you that are watching this, please, please, please call your lawmakers, send them an email, but do so in a respectful manner. Do so with gratitude. Do so out of love of country. All of us at times become frustrated, I think, with our lawmakers, in particular, maybe Senators Gillibrand and others who have been very careful in their language when it comes to UAP. And I understand why they do that. And moreover, it is important that we do not let our frustration as American citizens pour over into giving these lawmakers a hard time, to letting our frustration with the rate of how things are going. We don't want to be calling up Senator Gillibrand's office, Senator Schumer's office, Senator Heinrich's office, Senator Round's office. We don't want to be calling them up and saying, what are you guys doing? Rage tweeting, all that kind of stuff. We should be incredibly grateful as a nation, incredibly grateful as United States citizens, that Senators Schumer, Rounds, Heinrich, and Gillibrand have done what they said they would do and put this legislation forward again. They did what they promised. All of us must keep that in mind. So when you're calling your lawmakers and saying, we demand the passage of the UAP Disclosure Act of 2025 for the National Defense Authorization Act, I want all of you at home to contact the offices of Senators Schumer, Rounds, Heinrich, and Gillibrand, and Rubio, who I know will be on board. I want all of you to pick up the phone and call their offices, talk to their staffers, and say, I may not be in your district, but as an American, I am incredibly grateful to your boss, to your senator, for taking the political risk, for expending the political capital to right this wrong. Call them up, express your gratitude that they have done what they said they would do, which we know is often doesn't happen in Washington. That we are thankful for stepping up to the plate and doing the right thing for the United States of America. I, for one, am incredibly grateful to these senators for putting this forward. But we have the Senate, I believe, comes back in session sometime around between, I think, September 6th and 9th, 10th, somewhere in there. And that is going to be a critical time to message to members of the Senate that this needs to pass. This, in this case, must pass unanimously. If there is one dissenting vote, it doesn't go through. So folks, it is important that you step up, do the right thing, take your part in making righting this wrong, in making your voice heard at home and telling everyone in the Senate this unanimously must pass. Once we reach that point, then we'll talk about the House. And also, this is important. This is very important. I want all of you to reach out to Brandon Fugel of Skinwalker Ranch, to Travis Taylor of Radiance Technologies, to Jay Stratton of Radiance Technologies. I want all of you to message them on Twitter, leave comments that, look, we understand this eminent domain thing may not be perfect, but it is the best thing that we have. You have to tell these folks, we as Americans demand its passage, and we have to tell Brandon Fugel, Travis Taylor, and Jay Stratton that it is not right for them to lobby to derail this legislation a second time. It cannot happen. Period. The end. This isn't about Skinwalker Ranch. This isn't about Radiance Technologies. This is about something that all of us as Americans, all of us as citizens of the United States have a right to know. So when Brandon Fugel and Jay Stratton and Travis Taylor are derailing this, and I hope to God they make the decision not to do that again. But if they do it, it hurts all of us. It hurts us as a country. It hurts us as a species. So we must appeal to their better nature. We don't want to be rage tweeting at them or giving them a hard time or whatnot. We need to say respectfully to these folks, to Travis Taylor, to Jay Stratton, to Brandon Fugel, we need this to pass. And we don't want you guys to stand in the way like you did last time and manage to get it derailed. I love those guys. I love that show. It's the only reality show that I want, but this is bigger than, this whole topic is bigger than one person. It's bigger than any television show. It's bigger than any defense contractor. And it is high time we get this legislation passed. We've been given a second chance, and it's got to happen. But only you at home can make that happen by making your voice heard. Okay, so with that said, just we'll go through. I think we've got a couple of questions here. Again, thank you very much for the super chat. Sage Sleuth, thank you so much. Michael Wells, thank you for that very generous super chat. Very generous of you. We really appreciate it. Gandalf, thank you for the super chat. His question, Matt, are you still in touch with Gillibrand's office? She seems naive, went soft, and rolled over on UAP. Profoundly disappointing. Can we expect better from her in the future? I do indeed think that we will see really great things from Senator Gillibrand. As I mentioned, she has put her name behind this UAP Disclosure Act. Understand that just from a realistic point of view, our American politicians, they have a very long game to play. I'm sure Senator Gillibrand will run for president one day. I hope she does. I would vote for her personally. I think she would be an amazing president of the United States of America. So, with this topic, which carries a huge amount of stigma, they do have to be careful in terms of they're not talking to UFO Twitter. They have a very large audience to deal with, and there is, as we know, an incredible amount of stigma about this topic. So they have to be very calculated in what they publicly message on. I understand that. I do not blame them one bit for doing that. At the end of the day, Senator Gillibrand, whom we certainly would love to have back on the show, we owe Senator Gillibrand a incredible debt of gratitude as a nation for what she has done in terms of UAP legislation. If it were not for Senator Gillibrand and Rubio and others, we would not have federal law on UAPs and UFOs on the books right now. It would not be there. We owe Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, an enormous debt of gratitude. And we should all go out of our way to once again thank these senators for what they are doing, that they are fighting the CIA, they are fighting the Pentagon to get this out. We should let them know we appreciate everything that they are doing. We hope to have her back on the show. Absolutely. She is welcome on here anytime. Another super chat donation. Thank you very much from CR. Hey Matt, just curious. You seem certain that the truth on this matter is coming out. Can you please elaborate on how you are so confident on that? There are many things I obviously cannot talk about. There are many things that are shared in confidence by people in the government, be it in the Pentagon or the intelligence community. Nothing is ever shared with me that would cross the line and be a unauthorized disclosure or a security violation. But all of the people that I talk to, these are all folks that have TS clearance. These are all folks that have worked the UAP topic as part of their portfolio when working in the United States government. These are all men and women that are staffers on Capitol Hill that have the security clearance, the security tickets to view classified product on UAP. There is, as Colonel Carl Nell said, there is no doubt about this. As I mentioned back in June, I was at a retreat that Lue Elizondo that he sponsored, where I met countless numbers of people that work for the United States government that have worked with the UAP topic as part of their national security portfolio, that said flat out, there is no doubt we are dealing with a non-human intelligence, and there is no doubt that the American government, the Pentagon, and the CIA, who is the portfolio holder of this whole thing, that they are hiding all of this. There is no doubt about this. Absolutely none. Now, the difference, and I think this is where a lot of maybe the 50-ish or so gatekeepers in the senior executive service that have been hiding this legally from Congress, I think a lot of times they think that we are back in the 1970s, where if the Pentagon spokesperson gets up at the podium and says this is all baloney, in the 50s, 60s, everybody in the American public would believe it. Hey, the government said it's not real, so it's not real. But we know that we are at a different place and time. We have social media. We have the fact that social media has been a force multiplier for the American citizen, for the world citizen, to be able to amplify messaging and talk about things at a rate that we have never had the ability to do prior to the internet revolution. So to the 50-ish or so gatekeepers in the SES that are gatekeeping the legacy UAP reverse engineering and crash retrieval program, what I would say to you is that we are not in the 70s, we are not in the 80s, we are in a different time where people have a voice due to the social media mechanisms that they have access to. This is going to get out. There is a growing number of people within the Pentagon, within the Department of Energy, within the intelligence community. There are growing factions in those three-letter agencies that have decided that enough's enough. We got to rip off the Band-Aid and reconcile all of this and be truthful with the American public. There are whistleblowers who have been part of the legacy programs, who understand that this has got to come out. That if somebody doesn't do it, it's not going to happen. There are an increasing number of folks that have dealt with this professionally that I think are it's just going to come out. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I can't really elaborate any more on it, but it is going to happen. And whether this goes well for the United States or whether it goes poorly for the United States, whether this goes well for the American and world economy or whether this goes poorly for the American and world economy, how that goes is purely dictated by whether this legislation goes through, and is purely dictated by what the CIA, the Joint Chiefs, the National Security Council, and others in the executive branch, how they react to it. It is going to come out. People know who the names of the legacy program gatekeepers are, not past, are. It is going to come out. And people are going to demand answers, and people are going to be mad as hell if this is not handled correctly. So it's incumbent on all of us to call our lawmakers, thank them for what they're doing, tell them that this must happen, to let the folks that might lobby to shut down the UAP Disclosure Act, to let people like Brandon Fugel, Travis Taylor, Jay Stratton, and Congressman Mike Turner, Congressman Jim Himes, let them know, hey guys, now's the time to do the right thing. We all love our country. We all want what is best for it. Do the right thing. Let's get this legislation through the finish line. And let's all start unraveling this ball of yarn that has just continued to wind up and wind up and wind up decade after decade. Anyway, once again, coming up this Tuesday, the day that Lue Elizondo's book Imminent releases. We have our show at 5 p.m. live show with Ryan Robbins. We may have some other special guests that will join us to talk about what they are enjoying out of reading the book, what their favorite parts are, and of course we want all of you to join us as well. Let us know what you think about the book, what you're most surprised about, what revelations you thought were the most significant. Join us again this Tuesday, and we will post the link. To the show on our Twitter account, probably in the next hour or so. But we look forward to seeing all of you there. Our congratulations to Lue Elizondo, a true American patriot, for doing this. And so that's it. We will see you here in a couple of days on the Good Trouble Show.